My name is Hans Lessoue, and in this session for Risk Awareness Week, I'll be talking about scenario planning and how to leverage these for climate change or other global threats that may come around. It can also be used in other circumstances, but at this point in time, just let us keep focused. This presentation will be in 3 steps. First, we'll start looking at when to use scenarios and why we should use scenarios, just to get the background and have a common frame of reference. Then we'll be going through the prepare for uncertainty process that I have been working on for a number of years, including at my time during my time at the Lego Group, where we would define the axis, we'll describe the scenarios, identify and prioritize issues, and decide on actions. The last part of it is more optional. It's just a presentation on myself, who is Hans Lessoue, just that you know who has taken up your time for this and why we should do this. We look into when to use scenarios. The most normal way or normal timing of doing this is when we're planning for an unknown future. Now, all future is unknown by definition, but looking far ahead into the future or moving into a new industry or territory would maybe be a good reason for using scenario planning or scenario thinking in order to make sure that we have addressed what we need to address. Secondly, we may recognize that some trends and developments are likely to change direction. Instead of going the way it has always been doing, extrapolating the past into the future, we may need or may look into a change of direction that we need to prepare for. And the third one is looking at the company and say we may need to be prepared to ensure that we have the maneuverability that we need in order to cope with whatever changes comes. Some changes takes a lot of time to adapt to mitigate, to leverage. And here scenarios is a good tool, or scenarios planning is a good tool to get this done in time. Scenarios can actually be used at any level, but it's mostly on executive or corporate level that people are looking far ahead or are moving into new territories. So of course it'll be most normal to use it on a rather high organizational level. And why should we use scenarios at all? Well, first of all, they're used to help us think about issues that we would otherwise have missed. Looking at one way and looking at this is the world to change, it's not going to change in any different way, is simply not good enough. Shell used originally scenarios to imagine extreme outcomes, which was new to the world at this point. This approach that I am recommending here is not about extreme outcomes. It's more about the breadth of the broaden the view into things that we might otherwise have missed. Linear thinking is likely inadequate as preparatory mean. I mean, extrapolating the past into the future, what will happen if the world changes differently from what you planned for? And quite often, elements, even important elements of the world, will change differently from what you planned for. And yes, it does take time. I mean, it takes the longer road to identify issues to address it. But still, in this process that I'll be going through, we are talking about a single half-day workshop. It's not like a massive company investment to do this. The prepare for uncertainty process I'll be going through is one I developed during my time at the Lego Group. We used it for our strategic planning, business planning, major projects and stuff like that. It has also been described as a case study for Harvard Business School, and it has been used in the Strategic Risk Management Implementation Guide made by the American RIMS organization. The development of it was based on research, which means I've copied from a lot of different sources to get to the process that I believe worked with the company. It's a 4-hour workshop for a relevant management team. It could be the executive committee, it could be the operations office's leadership group, or whatever we need to do. And the 4 hours, well, the first hour we're looking at the driving uncertainties. Then we spent 2 hours describing the scenarios. Then we had a break because we need somewhat to clear people's mind before we come back for the last hour, where we define and prioritize the issues that are the true value, the true outcome of this process. Many teams that I've done this with have then added another discussion of who does what about which of these issues. The process and the tool is extremely simple. There are no math, no analytics, it's just a workshop. And the tool is a simple Excel spreadsheet template, mostly a text template, by the way. And your role as a risk manager, lead the process, challenge the team. You're a process jockey. You're not involved in the discussions that they have because it's important that those who discuss the scenarios, those who define the scenarios, have ownership of what they do. And they can only have that if it's their task and not yours. First step is about uncertainty drivers, where you end up picking two. Now, these drivers are all described in a card where you have two extreme outcomes, two opposite but extreme outcomes. In business conditions, here we can have a free trade world. Trade is pivotal and agreements are successful. Everybody can freely move goods from anywhere to anywhere, no customs, no duties, no nothing. Or we can be in the opposite world where we have 1,000 restrictions. Every country has protectionism. They want to come up with barriers and legislative restrictions to hamper global trade because they want to protect their own jobs. Are they both plausible? Yes. Are they equally likely? Probably not. Doesn't matter. Another one could be a political environment where you can look at a supranational bureaucracy where the EU and NAFTA and other major organizations in a slow and opaque process decides on which rules actually apply. Or no, we can go in the other where we have a democratic anarchy. Here, legislation is driven on a local basis or national basis, which means that NGOs can actually enforce and drive legislation. And it also means that the legislative process will be fast and somewhat unpredictable. We can have about resources. Do we have stable natural resources available for us, or do we get scarcity of resources? Very different worlds, very different impacts. We can have something about business conditions. Again, do we have stable conditions or do we have super volatility? How does that move? We can have macroeconomics. Do we get a new financial crisis or do we have a stagnant stability? This is foreseeable, this is doable. Moving into environmental legislation, do we have an aligned global action where international fora and global sets of actions are taken and implemented anywhere? Or do we have local dispersed action where some governments take actions whereas others do not? And finally, in this case, we can have, again, on the environment, do we have a sustainable development where we actually are limiting CO2 emissions and have a real slowdown on climate changes? Or is it running completely out of control? The efforts are made are inadequate and climate changes happens at an ever increasing speed and severity. Now, I have a total set of about 48 of these cards or these things, and they're in the tool that I will share with you and that I'll be going through. An important thing is that there are always two blank cards. I normally take 20, but I always take two blank cards because to ensure ownership, leaders should be able to write up their own cards. In my experience, somewhere between a third and a quarter of all teams end up doing one or two cards on their own. And some of them are also used when we get to the end of the story. But they should have the opportunity to ensure. Now, if they come up with a card that is really useful and really good, I'll just add it to my stack of cards and I may use it again for another session. Now, here we have the example team. They have been discussing for a while, and they're now down to these 7 cards that they are discussing about whether they should be included or not. And they're still focusing on their environmental strategy. And by doing so, they agree that this thing about free trade or restrictions, it's not really that relevant. Also, they find that the political environment is not that relevant, so they end up taking that one out. Natural resources, well, they can't quite agree on that one, and they have had some discussion. They tend to keep it in for a while, for now, so they do that. But then they look at whether you have stable or volatile business conditions. Yeah, at a point in time, one of them comes out with the idea that this is not really pertinent to environment, that's pertinent to something else. So they decide to take that one out as well. Macroeconomics. Can we have a new financial crisis-based environment? Oh, yes, we could, but that's more like a risk than a driver of our environmental strategy. Will it change our environmental strategy? Possibly not, not for that matter. So let's take that one out as well. Now we're down to 3, and they have a lengthy discussion and come up with, okay, this thing about resources is not that important. What we'll be down to is we look at the development of the environment and the legislation around it. These two are important drivers of how we do our business strategy and our environmental strategy. That choice. We now have this 2x2, commonly known Boston Consulting Group management tool, where we, in the tool, simply add the numbers of the cards that we've selected, and it comes out with this image where we have the global aligned action on the top and the dispersed action on the bottom. We have sustainable development to the left, and we have the climate changes out of control to the right. So we now have an image to that. The team, as I said, may write up their own drivers. In this case, they haven't, but we should be aware of the time when you run this process, because this can actually run totally overboard. Allow an hour, but be aware of the timing. And in the tool, enter the numbers, and you have this. It's totally auto-generated. There's nothing hocus pocus about it. Now we start focusing on one scenario, and let's take the top left. It doesn't matter which one we start with. Let's take the top left. What we do is that we use sticky notes of some brand or sort, whatever, in order to minimize the lemming effects and the likes of human biases, and to ensure that the more introvert do not hide. They will still have a possibility to come out with whatever they need to say or believe should be in there. It also drives some level of competition. Who has the best possible descriptions? So it balances what Kahneman would call system 1 and system 2 thing. So I'll give them some time writing up post-its. And now these guys have very nice handwriting. So the first count that comes up is that in a global aligned action with sustainable development, well, industrial and key investors address companies' climate footprint while deciding what to invest in. Okay, if we don't have a good climate strategy, we will not get funded. We will not get investors. Our share prices will drop down or something like that. That's a plausible description of that scenario. Also, people do not buy from nor seek employment with companies with an inadequately green profile. Okay, we have a sustainable development and we have a global action. This is actually driving the way or changing the way that we're doing business. There's a massive global innovation of business systems, products, and possibilities everywhere. We're looking for new ways of doing things all around the world and all different kinds of processes. Globally and collected shared legislation and taxation and regulation of industries as well as personal actions, which means you cannot run, you cannot hide anywhere, you cannot get under and get your own rules and try to benefit from that. And environmental sustainability becomes a KPI above profitability and growth. Now this impacts the way companies are being led. Boards will no longer just be looking at the profitability and the growth. They'll be looking into how are you doing environmentally, because they know and recognize that with a global world that is aligned on this and with the sustainable development, people will actually be cherishing this, or rather you'll be punished if you don't have it. And then you name it, and in this case, we'll have people walk in and say, what kind of world is this? This is a great world. A global, aligned, coordinated world where we actually get the CO2 emissions to drop. Nice. We'll like that. We'll call it a wonderful world. Doesn't mean it's out of challenges, but still it's there. This description, we should allow some 15 to 20 minutes time frame plus 5 minutes to name the scenarios. 15 minutes to write up, maybe only 10 to write up the sticky notes. 20-25 minutes to share them and discuss which should be there, discard any duplicates and stuff like that, and then 5 minutes at the end to come up with a name. And the name could be anything. It could be a brand name, it could be a movie reference, or anything else. In this case, it's just what a wonderful world. Now we go to the opposite scenario. This is where we have local dispersed action and climate change is out of control. Not a very nice place to be, very different from the first one. And in this one, some of the notes that comes up is, well, it's all talk and no real action by legislators. Each country, each parliament is focusing on local short-term interests only because they cannot afford to fathom anything else. Emerging and poor countries are hung out to dry. They cannot afford to take action with a growing population and a small economy. Climate change refugees roam the world and actually lead to increased nationalism and intolerance as a consequence of it. Where also, the political focus is on compliance. I cannot be blamed. That's good enough for me. So it's compliance with rules and regulations. Short-term relief packages will help some industries in some countries when they have been hit hard by environmental changes. It will happen somewhere in this scenario. Everybody states that they will take action, but it should not cost us anything, especially amongst leaders. We are very nicely looking at being the most green company, but we don't want to jeopardize our bottom line for doing so. And that keeps hampering all the green development. And international trade is becoming an uncoordinated legislative nightmare because every country come up with their own little legislation, short-term wins in order to do this, leading to a world where the climate change is out of control. This is what I call the disintegrated world. The team called it this disintegrated world. And this is where we have the opposite scenario. Now, very often in these sessions, the first scenario we described seemed to be somewhat easier, nicer than the opposite one, which turns out to be quite scary. Now, both of them will have significant challenges embedded in them. So let's be no mistake about that, but this one may seem more scary. With these two written up into the tool, and it's simply adding the text into the quadrants, we have these two tools. And now we ask people to look at the other in-between scenarios and coming up with what are they. Ask, how is this one different from its two neighbors? And when we have global action, aligned action, but it doesn't help. We don't have the climate change under control. We have some kind of global disillusionment where global entities agree that we should do more and it's too little too late and nobody can accept hurting the overall economical development. So there's a lot of discussions and no real actions. A lot of these things are the same as for the wonderful world and some are the same as for the disintegrated world, but these are some of the differences that comes out. And also in the fourth quarter where we look at small is beautiful. Now we have local actions, but it actually works. Public opinion in this one is expected to enforce companies and governments to take strong and immediate control. We cannot get the agreements on a global level, but we will have close monitoring of CO2 emission levels leading to mass legislation in the different countries. Black industries, the ones that are really polluting, are facing a lot of challenges, and innovation is local but not global. So there's a number of different things that describes this world. We should allow some 20 minutes for the two and come up with the completed matrix where we have all of the four scenarios that we have done now. At this point in time, we should be aware that the team has been working for 3 hours straight. We now have four distinctively different yet plausible scenarios. The team has picked two drivers that are mutually independent, reasonably independent, and coming up with four different descriptions of four different scenarios that all could happen. The selection of the drivers, description of the scenarios have been made by the leadership team. There's full ownership and a strong perception of validity because they believe in what they have done by themselves, and they have done it well. And now it enables the team to imagine issues which otherwise would have been missed, and that's the purpose of this. This is kind of a middle step into the process of identifying issues that we should address and that we haven't taken care of yet. The next step, and this is after the break, is that we define issues. And I explicitly call them issues because an issue, any one issue that we're looking for that comes into the future, can be a risk or an opportunity. That depends on how we treat them. It doesn't depend on what happens. It depends on how we wish to treat them as compared to our competitors. Any one issue can emerge from one or more scenarios. Doesn't matter. The scenarios are there for inspiration. So it could be this is relevant for scenario A and B, but not C and D. Doesn't matter. This one is A, B, and C, but not D. Okay. This is just D. Okay. And also, when you ask people to ask the leadership team to identify issues, please don't write down what you have already addressed in the draft strategy. I mean, that won't help anything. It may look nice and you've done a lot of issues very well, but this is about coming up with what you have not currently addressed. This is by adding value to what you have already done. So look for what is not currently addressed. Allow them to use some 15-20 minutes to think individually using sticky notes on issues, and followed by a 40-minute sharing and discussion and prioritization of these. Now, again, the sticky notes is to avoid lemming effects and allowing the introverts to come up and allowing the different angles to be heard before we start discarding anything. To prioritize, I use a 2x2, which I call a PAPA model, from the words PAC, adapt, prepare, and act. There are two axes on this one. The horizontal axis is on likelihood. Very, very, very simply, do we or do we not expect this to happen within our focus time frame? Could be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, doesn't matter. But within that time frame, do we expect this issue to emerge or do we not expect it to emerge? The other one about speed is slightly more complicated because it's relative to our adaptability. If we are able to adapt fast, then speed has to be very fast in order to be a fast issue. Let's take an example. You're looking at some issue that changes within 12 months. If that requires us to change our marketing approach, a marketing campaign, it will definitely be a slow one because we can easily change our marketing campaign in 12 months if we're more adaptable than that. If we have 12 months to change our distribution setup, we may be in trouble. We may be in serious trouble and say this is actually such a change over 12 months is actually fast and we need to be prepared in order to deal with it in time. When we share these and people have written them down on their post-its, we allow each presenter to argue or discuss whether this is fast or slow, as well as low or high likelihood, and place it in the quadrants. And then we have the team discuss and agree on the position in the PAPA matrix. Should it be in whatever? Because sometimes, well, different viewpoints, different angles move it up around a bit. What does it mean that they're in the different positions? Well, PAC is the easy one because here we have something we don't expect it to happen, and if it does, we can cross that bridge when we get to it. So the important message to executives is, right now, these issues don't do anything. And that's actually a relief. There are things you don't need to address. The things that you do believe will happen, but they will happen slowly and you can adapt to them gradually. It could be trends that are developing or stuff like that. You need to define an owner. What are you looking at? What actions and trigger values do you have before you actually start doing something or just following the flow? This is where you set the course for the super tanker, but not where you do anything dramatic. The things that are high speed but unexpected are mostly the strategic risks. This is where you need to define an owner, a warning detection, a course of action. This is where you execute most of your, should we say, normal risk management in order to deal with these issues and have them taken care of without necessarily doing anything up front. You may have preemptive mitigating actions, yes, but not necessarily. And then, of course, you come to the funny part, the ACT issues. Now, these are issues that the team have identified based on the scenarios that they have created themselves, and they have decided between themselves that this is moving fast and it's likely to be moving during our strategic horizon. So this is issues that we really, really need to address. So here we need the actions and the timing and the follow-up and who does it and stuff like that. All of that needs to be taken care of. Now, this discussion, you should allow about an hour for that one. At this point in time, People are very good into the discussion, and it may take more time. You may also want opt to open-ended it a bit. Depends on the different executives and how you can do that with timing. Now, let's look at the Papa model as an example. I've done a couple of dozens, or actually more, scenario sessions, both within the Lego group and with other companies. And teams have always had issues in all four quadrants. But looking at the act issues alone ensures the value of the half-day session. I mean, this is where the value is created. We come up with something we didn't recognize. But going back to the company that had the discussion of the environmental strategy and how they were going to pursue this, they did come up with some issues that were parked. There was something about volatility of materials and currencies. There was something about transport and trade legislation that may change. We don't expect this to happen. And if it does, we can cross that bridge when we get to it. We don't do anything right now. Fine, we have those. We don't forget them. We just keep them parked. We can address them later again. Adapt issues, well, we do expect these things to happen because this is where we see the trends of the greener world, or the more environmentally focused world, where we see change of customer and consumer preferences. We see changes of investor focuses, where they will have a positive, or look for a positive environmental profile. And we have legislation and taxation that changes, that focuses on CO2 emissions and greenness and stuff like that, and give benefits to the companies that are more green. These are the adapt issues. Somebody should keep monitoring on the eye on that one and figure out how do we address this as it moves along. On the prepare issues, well, one of the risks that we see is the frequent and unpredictable closing of shipment harbors and freight lanes because of environmental issues, floodings in harbors, all kinds of stuff that could come in there. Suddenly we get more frequent disruptions of our supply chain, which could be a problem, and we need to deal with that one. It can also be a matter of a new technology. It could be a process or material that provides us with an option of a new green core manufacturing process. Now, this can be an opportunity if we want to pursue it. So we should be prepared for it and should see, okay, what will we pursue, or who will address this, and be ready for it. And lastly, we have a competitor Y that is known to be a laggard, and they actually go belly up because they're not green enough to be acceptable by the public or by investors. So they leave a hole in the market, which we should be prepared to pursue. Now, all of these are strategic risks or opportunities that we may address, but if we're prepared to address them when they happen or as they happen, we can maybe even push for them to happen. We can deal with them much more effectively than if we just said, oh, this happened, we need to do something about it. And then we come with the act issues. Here we may see competitive products based on waste material, or manufactured with the zero waste industry 5.0 kind of approach. We will see fully digitalized, systematic and mandatory emission and other green data monitoring. And that will be, do we expect this to happen? Yes, we need to prepare for it or be ready for it. And oops, we have a site that is actually in jeopardy of massive flooding. It has been close. We've had a couple of close calls, or even perhaps very close calls, but now we need to address this issue. This site may actually flood for us, and we need to address these issues. This could be the issues that comes out of this hour of discussion, where companies have an idea of what they were doing, and then we can start focusing on the individual issues and what to do about them. In the tool, a template to take care of the act issues, because this is where the true value comes in, and say, okay, we need to define who does what by when and how do we follow it. These are the issues that team themselves have decided are expected and fast and not currently addressed. So addressing these alone will make the strategy a lot more resilient and relevant for the future. And the prepare issues become strategic risk opportunities to be addressed as such. So we are dealing with that as we can come along. Going back to the example on the decided act issues, well, we have an act issue about these competitive products. What have we decided to do? We have decided to take lead. We will actually drive this, investigate, research options of changing core material processes to Industry 5.0. It'll be the Chief Technology Officer who will be doing this, and he's to come up with a plan or a pilot to be made in 2022 and be certain that we are fully operational by 2030. It's monitored as a strategic must-win battle and addressed annually as part of the resource allocation. Now, this has become a standard operating procedure. We're moving this one in to strengthen our position by 2030 or by late 20s. The CO2 emission and light green data monitoring becomes systematic. Yeah, we should make sure that we have the data available and ease of collection so that this is not becoming very complicated the day that we have to report on it. And we should collaborate with auditors to systemize our approach. The CFO in charge of this one and is to do something by 2022, 2023 in order to make sure that we can actually do this and report quarterly on progress. And the report is to include and spotted competitor actions as well as legislative demands so that we keep being on front of this, and this is a non-issue when the issue emerges. And then we have this massive flood. Oops, we have decided to move our manufacturing from site X to a new site with no risk of flooding. This is the operation officer. He has to come up with a plan to be approved by the board of directors by 2022 and to draft our plan before the executive meeting in Q2 and a final plan for Q3 that can be approved by the board of directors by the end of 2022 so that we know how we deal with this, hopefully before site X is flooded. But now we have reduced the likelihood of it being flooded to a few years rather than something we await for and first deal with at that point in time. Now, the tool for this is an extremely simple spreadsheet. There are data references. Yes, there are no calculations in here because there are no data or no numbers in it. So it's very, very simple. There's a list of 48 driving uncertainties that you can pick from, and you can add or delete whatever you want to it to fit your purposes. The reference numbers are used to auto-generate the scenario matrix, so you can move it from there. And the Papa model is simply a text matrix, just as the scenario matrix is, by the way. It's simply a text matrix, so you can just enter whatever you have and making it simple that way around. There's also a template to address the ACT issues if you subsequently want to add that one. As I stated, a lot of companies actually do. In this session's example, it was based on strategic environmental risk management. However, it could also be flexible and used for anything else where changes are unpredictable. Very often used in strategic planning for different companies. This actually leads me to the last part of this presentation. Who am I? Well, my name is Hans Lessoue. I'm Danish. I'm 65. I have a wife. I have 4 children and 4 grandchildren. I have a Master of Science degree in Electrical Power Engineering, which is a long time ago. I graduated in '81. I've never professionally used it for anything. I've never worked with electrical power engineering, but I have 35 years of broad LEGO Group experience, including 10 years as their head of strategic risk management. I've had a lot of other roles as well, finance, operations, IT, product development. And then in April 2017, I started Actus. Now, that is my own company, and just like the LEGO name is a merge of the Danish words for play well, leg godt, Actus is a merge of the Danish words for active uncertainty, aktiv usikkerhed, because I believe that uncertainties are a fact of life. And we may as well learn to leverage these to our benefit as a competitive strategic advantage, rather than being scared and worried and all that stuff. So this is about me, and if you want to hear more, you have my contact details. Feel free to reach out to me. So thank you. This is about it. But do remember that you leverage the scenarios to broaden people's minds and get to think of things that they would otherwise have missed. You use a workshop in order to have ownership of what you get. Others do prepared scenarios prepared by specialists. I've tried that as well. It led to great discussions and absolutely nothing because there was no buy-in to the scenarios. As one of the executives said, I can't do my strategy based on these. Right, he couldn't. So workshopping is good. And of course, I'll be happy to help you in any way I can. So thank you and enjoy the rest of the Risk Awareness Week.